So, coming back to where we left off in the mid 1500s, basically Japan is in a state of civil war. And daimyo clans are fighting each other in the provinces for power, for territory. If there's a certain piece of land they want, or if someone has disturbed their family honor, they'll easily go to war against another daimyo clan, try to take over their castle and conquer their territory. And any normal government would have stepped in, intervened, and tried to stop it. But the Ashikaga shogunate was powerless. They couldn't, and more accurately, they wouldn't get involved in squabbles between the daimyo clans. So starting in the 1560s, a powerful leader of the Oda daimyo family, the Oda warrior clan, named Oda Nobunaga, comes to power in his Oda clan. He becomes the daimyo warrior head of the Oda family. And Nobunaga realizes that something has to be done. The country is in a state of stagnation. There's been fighting for pretty much a century since the Onin War, and the Ashikaga government is not doing anything. So Oda Nobunaga's dream is to unify Japan and become its supreme leader. Some interesting tidbits about Nobunaga. He was a very, very powerful military leader. Not necessarily a good strategist. Okay, that's something that I want to make clear here. Nobunaga, he was okay. He wasn't, he didn't have these kinds of very wise military techniques and strategies like others have been before him. He was just very strong. He was very powerful. He could defeat anybody very easily. That was Nobunaga's claim to fame. He was ruthless. He was brutal. Any hint of disloyalty would not be tolerated, and if you went against Nobunaga, he had no problem crushing you, your family, and anyone who had ever spoken to you on the street. Okay, so there was no remorse, there was no conscience. He just would do it, and he didn't care who you were. Okay, so Nobunaga was just very, very strong. He couldn't be beat because he was so powerful and so ruthless. Nobunaga was originally from the Nagoya area, the area that is present-day Nagoya. It's about halfway between present-day Tokyo and Kyoto. Okay, so the Oda clan controlled that province, known as the province of Owari, but he gradually expanded his territory by conquering weaker daimyo clans in neighboring areas. So he would attack a province that was ruled by another daimyo clan who was weaker. He would take that province over and add it to his province. So he would conquer weaker daimyo clans. And Nobunaga's secret behind his army being so powerful, in addition to his ruthlessness, was the fact that he had access to the muskets. Okay, remember that when the Portuguese arrived to Japan, they brought muskets with them, and the daimyo clans that had access to the muskets were more powerful because muskets can do a lot more damage and a lot faster of a damage than with bows and arrows and swords. So because he had so much access to these muskets, the European firearms, nobody could defeat Nobunaga's army. So, very quickly, in 1568, just a few years after he came to power, Nobunaga marches into Kyoto. Okay, he conquers Kyoto, the capital city. And, he meets with the Ashikaga shogun, Yoshiaki, who, by this point, the Ashikaga shoguns have zero legitimacy or power left. They're just completely powerless, okay? And Yoshiaki hopes that he could use Nobunaga's military force to take control of the country again. So he thinks, okay, I have this nice Oda Nobunaga's come in. Maybe I could use him to unify Japan again, basically, to put the daimyo clans under my direct control. Not using my army, but using Nobunaga's army to do the dirty work on my behalf. So Ashikaga shogun Yoshiaki basically just wants to make the Ashikaga shogunate powerful again, using Nobunaga. Of course, if you listen to anything I just said about Nobunaga, you probably can guess that he has no intention of being used by anybody. Okay, so Nobunaga had no intention of continuing the Ashikaga shogunate. He wanted to unify Japan himself without the Ashikaga. So in 1573, Nobunaga, who is in control of Kyoto, basically tells the Ashikaga shogun that he's fired. He says, "You know what? You have no power anymore. Let's just call a spade a spade. Your family hasn't governed for the last century. Thanks for your help. Take care." So Yoshiaki is exiled to a Buddhist temple, and he really can't do anything because the Ashikaga shogunate has no legitimacy left, no allies left. So Nobunaga, who's so powerful and almighty with the firearms, can basically do whatever he wants. Okay, and Yoshiaki doesn't harm or do anything to the emperor. Of course, the emperor is a god, and so he will allow the emperor to continue ruling as a figurehead. It's just that now, instead of the Ashikaga shoguns being the ones who are ruling on behalf of the emperor. Oda Nobunaga is ruling on behalf of the emperor. So Nobunaga's dream is to unify all of Japan and stop the civil war. So how would he do this? How did Nobunaga plan to unify the country? He basically said, I'm going to go one by one through each province, defeat the provinces by brute military force, and force the daimyo leaders of each province to surrender and declare loyalty to me. If they want to declare loyalty to me, I'll work with them and let them control their province. But I'll make they have to report to me. It's not going to be like before where they could do whatever they want, right? They'll let them control the provinces with my strict supervision. And if you declare loyalty to me, and if you don't want to, we'll get rid of you and your family and call it a day. So, but this is not an easy task. There's a lot of little provinces. There's a lot of fighting to be done. Interestingly enough, Nobunaga never took the title of shogun. Okay, he was a little narcissistic in that he believed that he was divine, and actually he even believed that he didn't need legitimacy from the emperor. He said, "I don't need any titles. I don't need any, court awards or awards or titles or anything like that. The shogun title is beneath me. I can do everything because I have the support of the gods, and I am divine in my own right." So he never took the title. He never became shogun. He never actually took any title. He was just the leader of the country. So Nobunaga's next step in unifying the country was to wipe out opposition from the daimyo clans who didn't want to succumb to him, and also to the Buddhist temples. Nobunaga, we wonder if he was a Buddhist because he actually despised the influence of the Buddhist temples and Buddhism. He didn't support it at all. And another reason behind this possibly is that the Buddhist temples were very against Nobunaga. They were disgusted by his brutality, they were scared of him, and they didn't want to support him. So Nobunaga and Buddhism had a very shaky relationship from the very start. So in 1571, after rumors that the Tendai priests on Enryakuji Temple, remember Enryakuji Temple, the headquarters of Tendai Buddhism on Mount Hiei, the warrior monks, there was a rumor that they were trying to rebel against Nobunaga. So in 1571, he attacks Enryakuji Temple, and this is because they had refused to declare loyalty to him, and there were rumors that they were going to rebel. So Nobunaga attacks this temple complex with his entire army. Enryakuji Temple's huge. Okay, it's a big place. There's a lot of fighting to be done. And he and his army basically razed Mount Hiei to the ground. Everything was destroyed, burned, okay? 3,000 buildings were burned to the ground. Over 1,000, almost 2,000 people, including Buddhist monks, nuns, everybody was killed. And there is, Enryakuji Temple was rebuilt. It still exists today, but it's almost half of its original size. It used to be a lot bigger before Oda Nobunaga's army destroyed the majority of the temple. So the razing of Mount Hiei in 1571 is a big turning point where the people of Japan see Nobunaga is not messing around. So everybody in Japan, including Nobunaga's own family, feared him. He was very, very feared by everybody, his vassals, his family, even his allies. Nobody dared rebel against him. And, most daimyo clans basically surrendered to Nobunaga without putting up a fight. If they were stupid enough to go up against him, he used his very unique military technique using firearms, where he would have an entire section of his army be gunners. So they would come, they would shoot, they would just come and start shooting. And then in order to save money on gunpowder and muskets, right, they would, after the initial shooting was done, initial bloodbath was done, he would have the old-fashioned troops come in and kill everyone else with the bow and arrow. So, they would shock the enemy with the muskets, and then they would finish them off with the bows and arrows. In 1575, Nobunaga defeats one of the most powerful daimyo warrior clan families, the Takeda family, at the Battle of Nagashino. And Takeda family was never defeated before. Okay, they were one of the top daimyo warrior clans. Even the Ashikaga shoguns had been scared of them. No one had defeated them before, but Nobunaga was able to do it thanks to his strategy of muskets. And this really worked. Rotating the gunners and the bow and arrow worked because the enemy didn't know what to expect. So they're escaping from gunfire, and then you have to deal with the bows and arrows. So it's very difficult for them to expect what was taking place. So by 1575, Nobunaga has basically conquered Kyoto and the area around Kyoto. So most of Honshu is under Nobunaga's control. Now he's turning his attention to the west, basically Kyushu and Shikoku, where the daimyo clan leaders there are pretty tough as well. So he said, I'm going to go down there and conquer these areas. These areas were very, very independent because they were so far away from Kyoto. So the Ashikaga shoguns had never been able to really control these areas. Nobunaga wanted to do that. So in order to have a base headquarters for his unification project, Nobunaga builds a castle, Azuchi Castle, near Kyoto. And it no longer stands today, unfortunately, but we have records from the Portuguese who were in Japan at this point, as you might remember already. And Nobunaga would always invite them to the castle. He was fascinated with Western culture, so he would invite the Portuguese to his Azuchi Castle. So the Portuguese have written about Azuchi Castle. It was overlooking a beautiful lake, Lake Biwa, and it was supposed to be a beautiful, beautiful castle. And that's why we're done with the Muromachi period. That's why this period is called the Azuchi-Momoyama period. Okay, I'll tell you what Momoyama is later, but this is called the Azuchi part of the name. It's named after the castle of Oda Nobunaga, and this is Lake Biwa, which the castle overlooked. This was Nobunaga's view from his bedroom. And this is what Azuchi Castle is said to have looked like, at the very, very top of the mountain overlooking the lake. And there's actually a little amusement park in Japan that recreates these old castles that have been destroyed. So this is what Azuchi Castle might have looked like had it still been standing today. You cannot go inside. This is like a miniature castle, but this is what it's said to have looked like. So as I just mentioned, Nobunaga was very, very obsessed with Western culture, and he wore Western clothes, it was rumored, when he would meet with the Portuguese. He was very tolerant of Christianity, and he did meet regularly with Portuguese Jesuit priests, with the missionaries. And, he felt that as long as the Europeans traded and spread Christianity, as long as it didn't get in his way of unifying the country, he didn't really care what the Christians did. And actually, another reason he was tolerant of Christianity was because he thought that it would slow down the power of Buddhism. He thought, wrongly, because it didn't happen, but he thought that if Christianity spreads, Buddhism's influence will decrease. So, if he was enemies with the Buddhists, he was going to ally with the Christians against them. But he himself was not a Christian, although some scholars claim that he was. We don't have any evidence to say that he was. So by the early 1580s, Nobunaga and his generals, they're all focusing on how to bring the daimyo clans of Western Japan under their control. Okay, and this was a big project, but some of Nobunaga's generals start to get tired of him. Okay, they just see that they're being mistreated, even though they've been very loyal, they've been by his side. Nobunaga has such a huge temper. He's so angry all the time. He's very brutal, constantly suspecting them, making them play games against each other. He just throws tantrums out of nowhere. So they're just getting angry and tired of him. And one of his generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, begins to plan an assassination of Oda Nobunaga. And a little backstory, Akechi had been humiliated several times by Nobunaga. He'll be public. They will be having a banquet, and Nobunaga would just start screaming at him, throwing things at him, beating him in front of the other vassals. Akechi Mitsuhide had it with Nobunaga already. So one day, Nobunaga and a very small entourage, he was traveling in Kyoto, and he was staying at a certain temple known as Honnoji Temple. And Nobunaga was supposed to have a meeting with the emperor, a secret meeting. So he wasn't traveling with his army or anything like that. He was staying at the temple. And of course, Akechi Mitsuhide knew this. So he and his army attacked the temple. And because Nobunaga didn't have his whole army with him, Akechi Mitsuhide's forces greatly outnumbered Nobunaga's, and they easily defeated him. Okay? But of course, Nobunaga commits ritual suicide, seppuku, before Akechi gets to him, because he wants to uphold his honor rather than let himself get killed by his vassal of all people. And interestingly enough, Nobunaga's head was never discovered. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories about whether he really died or not. Most likely, he did perish in the flames after committing suicide. This is Akechi Mitsuhide. You can see beginning to attack, and Oda Nobunaga sees the army, and he runs inside to commit suicide before they get to him.